Hola a todos y todas, how are you? I wanted to touch base with you because I noticed some difficulties in matching subjects and verbs, otherwise known as conjugation. This quick video should help you see the patterns and how to apply them. This is really important to get down in Spanish because there are so many different verb tenses, and each changes the endings of the verbs differently. Also, this week you will start to see more irregular verbs. You've already seen ser, estar, and tener. In English, we tend to conjugate much less and use more helper or what are known as modal verbs. So if this is your first time with Spanish or you haven't seen it in a while, this may be a new or difficult concept. It does take a lot of practice to get down. Remember, I linked to tutorials and videos as well as quizzes on Moodle to help you practice these concepts. But if you're still not getting it, which is that happens a lot with conjugation, so it's nothing unusual. Make sure you schedule a meeting with me or exchange some emails with me this week so I can help you. So what is a subject? So when we start conjugating a verb, we need to first know what the subject of the sentence is. This helps us decide what ending to put on the verb. In Spanish, the ending of the verb tells us everything we need to know. Oftentimes, we don't even put down the subject pronoun. We just have the ending of the verb telling us who is the subject or what is the subject of the sentence. But if you don't think a lot about grammar, and most people don't, you might not really know what subject means. So just in case, you can fast forward if this doesn't apply to you. The subject of the sentence controls the action of the verb. So let's first look at an example in English. Sally sells seashells. Good, I got that out. The subject is what there? Sally. Okay, Sally is the one selling seashells. We can also substitute Sally with what we call a subject pronoun. In English, this is she. She sells seashells. Notice the verb, which I put in red. The ending changes if I use a different subject, even in English. So if I change this to I, or the first person, it becomes I sell seashells. Much easier to say, by the way. So let's go ahead and look at an example in Spanish. Amanda estudia español. In this sentence, Amanda is the subject. Estudia is the verb. And español is known as the object. We're not going to worry about objects yet, but that's what that is. Here, when I was conjugating, I changed the infinitive of the verb estudiar to estudia because Amanda corresponds to ella, or third person singular. So let's go ahead and review the subject pronouns of Spanish. On the next slide are the pronouns, but sometimes you will see names, objects, places, or other nouns as subjects. So here are your pronouns. When we talk about the first person, such as I in English, it's yo. If we pluralize that, anybody else plus ourselves, that's we or nosotros. If everybody were female, it would be nosotras. In the second person, when you're talking directly to someone, we have two options in Spanish for the singular. One is tú, and the other is usted, which has an abbreviation, right? So if I'm informal, if I'm on the same social level as someone, or somebody is especially younger than me, I will use tú. Whereas to indicate more formality, respect, or with someone older, I'll use usted. Now, this changes per the culture. So that's not a hard and fast rule. In the plural forms of the second person, in Spain, for informal situations, they use vosotros or vosotras. However, in Latin America, we only use ustedes. There is no second person informal. Ustedes is used for all when you're directly addressing groups. Now, the third person singular is either él or ella, and that's when we're talking about others, he or she. And then when we make that plural, it's either ellos, if it's all men or men and women together, or ellas, all women. So hopefully you've gotten that down from the first chapter. You have seen some irregular verbs, so I'll just get these out of the way because these conjugate not according to a pattern. They have their own pattern, but it's not a standard pattern that can be widely applied. So you have to memorize these. There's no way around that. For ser, to be, here are your forms. Yo soy, tú eres, él, ella, usted es, nosotros somos, vosotros sois, ellos, ellas, ustedes son. For estar, which also means to be, but is used in different situations. Yo estoy, tú estás, él, ella está, usted está, nosotros estamos, vosotros estáis, ellos están, ustedes están. Okay, now let's move on to regular verbs in the present tense. We're going to see how to conjugate these. They do follow a set pattern. There are many irregular verbs in Spanish, but there are quite a number of regular verbs as well. So, and you'll also see irregular verbs partially follow this pattern. So the first thing is to check your infinitive. First of all, any infinitive is going to end in either AR, ER, or IR. That's important to know because that tells you the pattern of verb endings that you will use. So first of all, AR verbs. If your infinitive ends in AR, it's an AR verb. Okay, pretty simple. Here are some common examples. Hablar, to talk or speak. Estudiar, to study. Caminar, to walk. Cantar, to sing. Bailar, to dance. ER, IR verbs. Often ER and IR are grouped together because they are similar in pattern, only differing in the nosotros and vosotros forms. Here are some more infinitives, and by infinitive, it just means it hasn't been conjugated yet. Aprender, to learn. Beber, to drink. Comer, to eat. Vivir, to live. Escribir, to write. Asistir, to attend. So once you've identified the class of your infinitive, AR, ER, IR, you know the patterns per every subject pronoun. So you can see these here. For all three of them, yo ends in O, and that's an easy one to remember, yo, O. You can see tú for AR is AS, ER is ES, and IR is the same. For AR verbs, él, ella, usted ends in A, ER in E, and IR is also E. Nosotros, AR ends in amos or AMOS, ER in emos, and IR in emos. So that one is where ER and IR are different. For vosotros, AR, you have ice, ER, ace, and IR is going to be different. It's is. Finally, for ellos and ustedes, AR ends in an, ER ends in N, and IR is also N. Let's see some examples now. For example, I want to say, we speak a lot in class. I know that we corresponds to the subject pronoun nosotros. I have the rest of the sentence in mind, mucho en clase. How do I conjugate the verb? I know the verb is hablar, so I have to go to the AR chart and decide what ending corresponds to nosotros. Looking at this chart here, you can see the answer will be hablamos. How did I do that? I chopped off the AR at the end and I tacked on the AMOS ending for an AR verb in the nosotros form. Here's another example of an ER verb, comer, to eat. I want to say, she eats in the cafeteria. I know that the corresponding subject pronoun for she is ella. Ella come en la cafetería. How did I do that? I know the verb is comer. It's an ER verb. I look at the ER verb endings. For ella, it just ends in an E. I take off the ER and I tack on the E. Ella come en la cafetería. Here's an example of an IR verb, vivir, which means to live. I want to say, Paco and Brienne live in Syracuse. Paco y Brienne, I should say, in Syracuse. How do I conjugate this verb? Well, I'm talking about other people, not directly to them. It's two people, so it would be ellos. I go to my IR verb endings, and I see it should end in en. Therefore, the answer is Paco and Brienne viven en Syracuse. Muy bien. Verbs are such an important skill in Spanish and one that can be a little bit overwhelming at times. However, just take a deep breath. It takes time to master. In Spanish 101, we don't master the language, but we're laying the groundwork for increased ability to communicate both fluently and accurately. So, sé paciente, be patient, and practice a lot. This upcoming week, with chapters 3 and 4, you have a lot to read and practice. It's the busiest week, but you'll be able to draw on these skills throughout the rest of the course as well. And certainly if you continue beyond this course, these will be very valuable types of information for you. So here are 4 categories of verbs you will see. Yo-go verbs, that means the yo forms are different than the normal pattern. Stem and spell changers, that's when the beginning part of the verb changes somehow. Either the vowel's going to change or there's going to be a changing of spelling. The verb ir, which means to go, it's totally irregular, just like ser and estar. And then finally, reflexive verbs, which are verbs where the object and the subject of the sentence are the same, and we indicate this with the use of a reflexive pronoun. So remember, again, and I tell all my students this all the time, you're just starting to learn verbs, so practice, but mostly aim to communicate. Communicate and connect. You don't have to be perfect to communicate. And so it's a balance. I always encourage you to use the language as much as possible, and the form will follow. So mistakes are okay. Not only are they okay, they're actually a natural part of language acquisition, and they're unavoidable. So just a quick look at yo-go verbs. Here are some of our common yo-gos in irregular Spanish verbs. Some of these verbs will be irregular in different ways, like they'll be stem changers or spell changers. But you should at least know the yo forms of these verbs, especially tener, hacer, decir, poner, salir, and venir are so common. We use these all the time in the present tense. So you really want to be able to use those. Now you can see in this chart, which is a little bit overwhelming, I know, that some of these verbs will change in different ways. Like if you look at tener, which is on the upper right-hand corner there, means to have. You see the yo form is tengo, a go-yo or yo-go, either way. But then when you conjugate the rest of them, it's actually what we call a stem changer. So what is a stem changer? You see that IE in red for tener. That's our stem change. Let's look at that a little bit just as a preview. Stem changers. A verb is made up of its stem and its ending. So if I were looking at the verb hablar, the ending we know already is AR. The stem is that HABL. That's the stem of the verb or the root of the verb, okay? So for some verbs, and there's not really rhyme or reason of which verb will do this. It's something you learn when you learn the verb. Sometimes the vowel in the verb stem will change. However, in the present tense, it will not change for nosotros or vosotros. Those get conjugated normally. So stem changing is an additional fact you need to learn about verbs. When you learn the meaning of a verb, you should be paying attention to whether it's a stem changer or not. Usually the stem change pattern will be indicated in parentheses, but eventually you just have to know that it's a stem changer. For example, the verb, which means to think, pensar, is an E to IE stem changer. This means when I conjugate pensar, I have to, 1, conjugate the ending to match the subject. 2, change the stem vowel in all forms except nosotros and vosotros. So I give you 2 examples here. In the yo form, I've changed the E in the stem to an IE. Yo pienso, I think. In the second example, I'm doing nosotros, right? And so I'm not going to stem change. It just looks like a normal conjugation. Nosotros pensamos. Here are some more examples of types of stem changes that you might expect to see. Usually we learn the verbs in categories. All the verbs that go from E to IE, all those that go from E to I, or O to UE. There's only one verb that's U to UE, that's jugar, to play. And I'm sure many of you have seen that verb before. You might talk about playing sport, right? Yo juego deportes. For example, I play sports. So take a look at this. You can see on the one hand, the endings are changing according to the subject pronoun, just like you would expect for an AR, IR, or ER verb. But then there's this additional change in the stem, except for nosotros and vosotros. Sometimes you'll hear this described as a boot verb. You can look in your course material to see why that is. But basically, it depends on how you make your verb chart. If you lay it out a certain way and then you circle the forms that stem change, it ends up having the shape of a boot. Okay, so again, you can check your course material to see that on page 21. In chapter 3, I should mention. Okay, so finally, the last bit of preview are reflexive verbs. So when the subject and object of a sentence are the same, we indicate this with what we call a reflexive pronoun. It's just an extra little word that will go before the conjugated verb. And if it is a negative sentence after no, here are some examples. Yo me levanto, I get up. Ella se va, she leaves. Nosotros nos sentamos, we sit down. So you can see there the verb, like levanto, sentamos, but there's this extra piece before it, and that corresponds to the subject pronoun. It just tells us that the subject and object of the sentence are the same. You can see here the pronoun on the left, its corresponding reflexive pronoun, and then examples of an AR reflexive verb, an ER reflexive verb, and an IR reflexive verb, which also happens to be a stem changer, E to I. Okay, so a lot of times we use this for daily routine, talking about things we do to ourselves, such as take a bath, brush our teeth, get dressed. In those cases, the subject, the person doing the action, is also receiving the action. Thus, it's called reflexive. It reflects back onto the person doing it. Okay, so I know that's a lot. I hope this video will help introduce these concepts or reinforce kind of the basics of conjugation. But overall, por favor, relájense, no hay problema, no se preocupen y por favor, no lloren, don't cry. I'm here for you. If you need anything, just send me an email and we'll set up a meeting. And most of all, just have fun trying to explore the language and see how complex and beautiful it is, and try to communicate with it to the best of your ability. Okay, everyone. Get in touch if you need anything.